Please give a warm welcome to Professor Mathew.
Good morning. It's a much better day today, right? I mean, yesterday it was all raining, and today we have pandas in the courtyard. So thanks for coming. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? OK. All right, so my name is Anijo Mathew, and I'm an associate professor at the Institute of Design in Chicago. Just to give you a little background of where I'm coming from and who I am, I have an architectural degree from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And when I was in Cambridge, I spent a lot of time at the Media Lab looking at technology. And I have a computing PhD from the UK. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because in my own work, I actually combine these three things, right? So I take space, I take users, and I take technology and put them together. And so that's what I'm hoping to talk about today, is the intersection of these three things. So I teach at the Institute of Design. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Institute of Design, it's a 75-year-old school born out of the traditions of the Bauhaus. It was established by Moholy-Nagy, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, in the late 30s in Chicago. Now, one of the things that we do at the Institute of Design is we look at design from the perspective of business. And this is interesting for some of you in the audience because you are either involved in business or use design to influence business practice. So if you think about what happened over the last century, something interesting happened after the Industrial Revolution. Pre-Industrial Revolution, we all used to make products for our neighbors, right? So I made products, you made products, I bought your products, and you bought my products. Post-Industrial Revolution, something interesting happened. We started to manufacture products. And this changed something in organizations. From an organizational knowledge point of view, over time, this meant that organizations pretty much knew how to make anything. So since then, they could make anything. So the curve that talks about how to make, that describes how to make, goes up post-Industrial Revolution. During the same time, something else happened. The curve of what to make really went down. So then what we had is this idea of excessive choice, right? So because organizations don't know what to make, they just make everything. So you guys have 225 cereal boxes in your supermarkets, right? The reason why you have 225 cereal options in your supermarkets is because companies like Kellogg's don't know what users will buy. So they'll just make everything they can possibly make in the hope that one of this will be a success, right? So at the school, we talk of this as the fuzzy front end of design. This is where the what to make, this is the patterns of living. This is how people live and people behave. That's the kind of thing that we study. And the deflection between, sort of the space between these two curves is what we call the innovation gap. And so what we try to do at the school is model the fuzzy front end for organizations. Now, my own work looks at this from so all of us look at this from three different points of view. Any innovation has to be viable, it has to be feasible, and most importantly, most of you guys, I'm assuming, are designers, it has to be desirable, right? So we have to invoke a sense of desirability. If we don't do that, it doesn't matter if it's viable or feasible, people are not going to buy it, right? People are not going to live in those homes. People are not going to buy the furniture if it isn't desirable. Now, my own work looks at this from three different points of view. I look at interactions between people. I look at interactions between objects and people, which is, if you look at it, the first is communication design, or the second is interaction design or product design. And interestingly, as things get more, objects become more sentient, I start to look at the interactions between objects and objects. Think of intelligent objects talking to themselves, right? So I look at these three things from the perspective of technology. So the reason why we are here is to talk about spatial experience. So let me try to construct spatial experience from that perspective of people talking to each other, people talking to objects, and objects talking to each other. So all of us live in physical space, yes? You're here, are you all awake, right? So you're all awake, you're here, you're sitting in these chairs, and then there's, so for example, Colin, there's the Colin who is sitting in this chair in this room, yes? Right? So we live in physical space. We move in physical space. We interact in physical space. Your shoulders are rubbing against the person next to you in physical space. Now, what's interesting is that because we live in physical space, our manifestation of this environment takes on different forms, right? So we start to see this in the form of architecture and art. So this is the amazing bean in Chicago, right? Or we start to see this from the perspective of urban design. So this is the Times Square rejuvenation that basically changed the perspective of Times Square from an information-rich experience to this user-rich experience, yes? Or we see cities from the perspective of journalism, right? So this is the inauguration ceremony for Obama in the US, and we start to see our spaces in the form of news or journalistic endeavors, photographs, and that sort of things, but everything related to physical space. And then, of course, because we are physically oriented, we need physical space to start revolutions, right? So this is Tahrir Square, where the Occupy movement started in Egypt, right? This is where all the Occupy movement started from. I'm going to make two proposals that will disrupt this notion of physical space. Let's see if you guys agree with this, okay? So the first proposal is that even though we like to think it is space that is important, in reality, it is place that is important. Let me explain. Our body, our physical embodiment, responds to material, to form, to texture, to sensory aspects, yes? So for the designers, this is what it translates into. So this is a really beautiful piece of architectural work by one of my friends, and this is sort of the sensory modality that we are trying to tap into. Beautiful work, yes? The reality, however, is that even though the form is important, it is really the immaterial aspects of that experience that we retain. So the memory of the space, right? The stories that we construct around this, the narratives, the photographs that we take, the pictures that we build for other people. So that we go to, let's say, Ocean Park, right, in Hong Kong. We don't go there because of the walls or the penguins and all. We go there because of the experiences we have in that park. Listening to all the laughter in the park, to listen to all the shrieks and the screams at the roller coaster, right? So that's what we go for, this memory. So in reality, what we as designers are designing, and even though architects like to talk about themselves as spatial designers, we're really spatial designers. We're designing the experience that exists at the intersection of space and memory, form and memory. Now, what does this mean? Why is it important to differentiate between space and place? Well, space is actually quite boring, right? It is a geographic layer. It is location. It's latitude and longitude. It's the physical location that Colin is sitting in from a quadrant point of view. Place, on the other hand, is an emotional layer. This is what is romantic. This is what we remember about space. We don't remember the four walls. Now, the four walls are important because we construct something within the four walls, right? It's what makes our house a home. You don't go back to your house. You don't go back to furniture. You go back to the life that you have around the furniture. Super exciting because we have now, all of this means that we are now entering into a completely different economy. It's called the information economy. The information economy is important because it's different from all preceding human economies. If you think about all economies, there's hunting, agriculture, manufacturing, there's something significant about this. All of these economies had one thing in common. And that thing is, if I made something, if I had if I designed a bottle, right? If I designed this, and I gave it to Hannah here, I no longer have that bottle. Hannah has that bottle, right? The difference in information is free, which means if I make information and I give that information to Hannah, and Hannah takes that information and builds on that information, Hannah gets Hannah gets information. My information is better because Hannah built on top of it. And it becomes an exchange that is much more interesting than the atomic scale representations that we have used before. So what happens is that there's a whole generation of users who don't even understand what consumption means. They don't think about TV the same way as most of us think about TV, right? They don't think consumption is the only way to deal with information. They don't think about books. They think about production. YouTube is the way that this generation communicates. This is my daughter. She's 4 years old. She's born into information. She walks up to touch screens. She walks up to any screen, and she expects it to be touch. She takes a book, she opens it up, and she looks at the picture, and she goes, Papa, this is broken, right? Because that's what she expects. And in this generation, users want to participate. They expect platform experiences. They don't want things to be given to them. They want to construct it together with them. And we're going to see some amazing examples of this as we go through the day. In an industrial economy, we used to be material collectors, right? So we loved our Gucci's, and we loved our Louis Vuittons, and Pradas, and Nikes, and things like that. But what has happened is, in an information economy, we become experiential collectors. We no longer really care about the Gucci's. We want to talk about the place we got the Gucci from. It doesn't matter if it's a counterfeit, it's a duplicate bag, but the story that we build around that duplicate bag is more interesting. The fact that I travel in business class is more exciting than what happens in the business class experience. Experiential collectors, that's what we have become. And if you put these two proposals together, we can reframe spatial experience. Spatial experience is not about space. Spatial experience is about information, and it's about place. It's about our lives in space. It's about the information that we construct, the experiences that we construct in place. So what does this mean for us? What this means is we have to think of place as an experience platform. Traditionally, we thought of place as something that we built and everybody came in and interacted in, right? So the left-hand model. The problem with that model is that you have to build the platform and the experience. And if anything goes wrong with it, you're blamed for all of the problems that come up with space, right? The right-hand model, on the other hand, is a platform model, in which case you only build the platform. The actual experience is constructed by the users that come onto the platform. So if you think about place as an experience platform, we start to do case studies in this. So we do the little follies. So I'm an academic. I'm not a consultant. So I don't do this as sort of practice. For practice, I do it because I am interested in researching what people want to do in this place, right? So we worked with Chicago. We work a lot with Chicago, and I've tons of work on my website, but I'm going to talk about one specific project that we did with the Tourism Board of Chicago. Now, the Tourism Board is interested in the airport experience in Chicago because Chicago is becoming a hub for major transit into the US. So, carriers from the Gulf are bringing passengers in, and then they transit into American carriers, and so they often have 4+ hours of layover time in Chicago. So what do they do in that 4+ hour layover time? So one of the things that we started to talk about is, can we bring a piece of the city into the airport? So we can transcend physical space using information. So that's the question we started to ask, right? So in this case, we started to think of place as an extended experience platform. If you think of the person coming in, they're moving from one place to the other. But then there's place that's created in the airplane, there's place that they're coming from, and then there's a place that they're going to. And all of this become an extended platform that you can play with. And so we did 2 projects for them. So one is called Detours, and this is going to be prototyped in the fall semester, so I'm just going to show you some snippets of what the projects look like. The first project is the ability for someone to come into Chicago, go out into the city for about 4 hours, and come back, catch their flight, and take off again. So the way we did this is we had multiple touch points of interaction. So in the plane, they have very traditional touch points, like the IFE will tell a story, the brochures that tell a story. When they come to Chicago, we have these telescopes that are all around, and they can move these telescopes around to see what it feels like to be out in the city. So now you're transcending this idea of physical space by bringing space into the city. So then they can go up to kiosks and select, for example, a journey that they want to do. So for example, if you want to do a hot dog tour of Chicago, you can get that. And then when you do that, you're given a wearable system. And these are all existing technologies that we use. And when you go out, you get a printed map that gives you all of the itineraries that you can do within the 4-hour tour. And then as you walk through the city, the system allows you to experience the city, but also tells you when it's time to go back, right? The second project is called Localized. So we wanted to show how locals think of the city. So in this case, again, the same experience, starting from maybe they are in Heathrow, they're walking to Chicago, they see the localized experience right up in London. When they get to Chicago, they have a portal into the city, and the portal is a constructed narrative of all the people in the city. Remember, these are baby steps, right? None of this is going to be anything as exciting as some of the folks that we're going to see in the afternoon. But these are tests into follies, into thinking of information as a material. So what happens is that you walk up to the system and you start to play with it, and you start to get stories from the perspective of locals. So for example, let me show you an installation example that personality has one bar, and then as you swipe the bars, the narrative that comes on the side is an aggregate of all 4 personalities on the side, right? So if you make one personality come up on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, the narrative that comes on the right-hand side is a complete narrative of what that person would do in Chicago, right? So essentially starting to translate a physical experience into an informational experience. So I hope I've been able to at least intrigue you with some ideas of what new placial experiences might look like, right? In the future, we're not talking about physical interactions anymore just on their own. We are talking about interactions that transcend physical space into informational and transactional space. Thank you. So since I am the moderator for my own event, so any questions or comments? So we have mic runners if you have any questions.
The technology was fascinating and very exciting, but there's a movement towards privacy, people choosing to remain private. How do you overcome that with what you're proposing?
Right, so do you want the politically correct answer, or do you want my answer?
I want the honest answer.
So the honest answer is, I think that we are kidding ourselves when we say we have privacy. And I think that as a generation, we are living in the 20th century when privacy was the de facto standard for our lives. And the honest truth is, I believe that if we let go of the thought or the ideal that everybody has a private life, then we can have much more mature conversations about how to secure sort of a community's privacy, or how we can start to build walls around what that means for predators and things like that. The problem is we still think that we live in the 20th century where the four walls of our house protect ourselves from everybody else. Now, the politically correct answer is that you're right, that privacy is a very important part of all this, and we're dealing with the city. This is a government that we're dealing with. And Chicago is in the limelight all the time because it makes these false moves. How many of you guys are gamers in the room? Any gamers? Do you know Watch Dogs? The game, there's a new game called Watch Dogs, but the entire premise of the game is that Chicago has become sort of a 1984 Orwellian nightmare. That all the lampposts know who you are and where you are. And just last week, Chicago released a set of lampposts that could track people. So we're living in a world where privacy is becoming a big issue, but my hope is that if we let go of these ideas that privacy is important, then we can have mature conversations. Other questions?
I found the presentation about detours very exciting. I was just wondering, how do you enable them to access those things? Would you need Wi-Fi for that? Because that's something that the tourists don't have, and that's something telcos control.
Right. This is, see, again, you're absolutely correct. This is one of the biggest problems with the information landscape. I was just telling Colin yesterday that you guys can't do this because when you build stuff, it has to work. When I build stuff, I'm an associate professor at a university. If it breaks, they'll say, oh, academic, right? It's OK. So you're right. Things like that are a big problem. In this venue, we have Wi-Fi network, but we have 20-minute time limits on these Wi-Fi networks. Yet, half of our life in this space exists in the internet. So our physical spaces have not reconciled with the idea that information is a material. And it's taking time. You're absolutely correct. These things fail because of those kind of infrastructural issues. So someone coming from Australia can't tap into the American telephony network, and there's no way they can get this. So what we are doing is instead we're giving them phones that are enabled with systems tapping into the existing Wi-Fi telephony networks as stopgap measures towards something, hopefully in the future, where there's standardization. Right. Other questions?
To follow on your question, talking about we are now losing our freedom because the system are watching us. How we could protect ourselves? Because,
how can we protect ourselves?
Yeah, because we are not choosing to communicate with certain people.
Right.
And we are not choosing to be watched.
Yeah.
But how could we avoid being watched?
Yeah. So the two things that so one thing that you mentioned is freedom, and the other thing that, Catherine talked about is privacy. Right? They're two different things. I think our freedom is still intact, at least I hope so. Right? Privacy, on the other hand, your question is leading to, are we being watched all the time? The honest truth is, we're being watched now. We just don't know, or we don't accept it. We have put up this. So there's, for those of you who are familiar with what's happening in the US, there's a big ruckus about the NSA tapping into people's phone records, right? Now, there was a piece on the National Public Radio that said that if you can imagine it, NSA is doing it, right? Which means that as a community, we have absolutely no privacy. We have just built this pretense that there is privacy. Now, if we can understand that these privacy walls don't exist, then we can sort of transcend and say, look, I don't want to be watched, right? So what are some of the mechanisms that we can set up? So an example of this is banking systems. When credit cards came out, in the beginning, it was any man's land. There were no rules, there were no regulations. Then banks got together and said, look, this is people's money that we are talking about. We need to have transactional efficiency here. We need to have protocols that enable transactional encryption. And encryptions were set up. If you're on an HTTPS link on a browser, you can pretty much be sure, even if you're in an open network, that you can do bank transactions without anybody snooping in. But those are all experiences that came up because we accepted the fact that there is a problem, right? But I think we have, and so freedom, I think, is okay. We're still okay in that realm so far. Now, there are regimes that are problematic. For example, Syria took away communication for a long time, right? They stopped the internet altogether. So regimes might have problems, but as a community or as a society, we're okay in terms of freedom, I think, at least. Thank you so much. I'm, of course, available for discussing these ideas later on.